So the Switch 2 launched in 2025, and I think it was just kind of an odd year to launch a console. Not anything to do with Nintendo's point of view, but I think that many people are struggling financially in the wake of, I guess, tech layoffs as well as just general layoffs. And Nintendo, in a meeting with their shareholders, announced that the Nintendo Switch 2 sold 17 million units, which is, of course, a great number for a console. However, they did say that Nintendo Switch 2 sales have been slightly weaker than expected outside of Japan. From an article by Tom Phillips over at IGN, Nintendo has discussed the fact that Switch 2 hardware sales were lower than expected outside of Japan towards the end of 2025. Speaking to the shareholders this week, Nintendo President Shigeru Furukawa acknowledged that overseas sales were slightly weaker than our expectations, something that had been previously reported and discussed by IGN and analysts, though not stated out loud by the company itself. Still, in an investor meeting following the release of this week's latest financial earnings, Nintendo shareholders repeatedly questioned the company on its Western sales shortfall, even as the Switch 2 overperforms within the homeland of Japan. While our forecast global hardware and software sales volumes remain unchanged, the breakdown by region and product is based on different assumptions from the revised forecasts announced at the time of our second quarter financial results announcement, Furukawa said via machine translation. Furthermore, as you understand, domestic hardware sales volumes exceeded our expectations, while overseas sales were slightly weaker than our expectations, he continued. Sales figures collated by the game business last month showed that U.S. Switch 2 sales over the holiday period were down 35% versus Switch 1's first holiday sales performance back in 2017. In the UK, a similar comparison saw Switch 2 lagging Switch 1 by 16%. Even in Nintendo's homeland of Japan, Switch 2 holiday sales couldn't match Switch 1 and were down by 5.5% over the year's final 9 weeks. In France, 2025's final tally of Switch 2 sales were down by over 30% versus the amount Switch 1's notched up back in 2017. Meanwhile, while these numbers may take some of the shine off of a successful first year for the Switch 2 overall, it's not all doom and gloom. Switch 2's lifetime sales in Japan are still above the Switch 1, what the Switch 1 managed in its first year with the less time on sale. And in the UK, Switch 1 continued to sell well enough that it made up Switch 2 holiday sales deficit. So I think that's an extremely interesting point. So I am a big fan of Pokemon. I know, not the most popular game that people can be a fan of these days. I'm sure that my B-roll of ZA is what's over this voiceover. But when the launch of Pokemon ZA was announced, I was like, well, I don't really feel like I need to upgrade to a Switch 2. Granted, the performance, textures, all that are better on the Switch 2, but it was fine enough. And let's be honest, people aren't going to Pokemon for the, greatest performance or textures. They just want to play the game, and that was shown by the majority of the sales coming on the Nintendo Switch 1. Granted, huge install base for the Switch 1, so that makes sense that it outsold the Switch 2 in that instance. But another big thing this year was that the Switch 2 was more expensive in the United States due to tariffs, as well as, chip shortages looming. And then that doesn't even factor in the fact that a lot of people right now are just not as well off financially as they have been in the past due to layoffs, specifically in the tech sector here in America. But, layoffs generally, it's a really difficult time, especially if you lose your job, to find another job. And when people are trying to cut back on their spending, video games are very often the very first thing to go. So these numbers outside of Japan are not terribly surprising to me, and I'm sure that many analysts would agree. But what are your thoughts? Did you upgrade to a Switch 2? If so, what do you think? Let's also be honest, there's only a couple of new games for the Switch 2, and I don't think people were necessarily dying to run out and spend upwards of $450, $500 just to experience a new Mario Kart that was well reviewed when it launched, but a lot of people we're like, there's just not a great end game of this. Is not a reason to play it for super long time, especially when that's your premier exclusive. So again, what are your thoughts on all of this? Are you planning on getting a Switch 2? Do you already have one? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We have new videos coming out all the time on this channel, including shorts, so check those out as well. And check out our main channel, Wicked Everything, for video game essays, our Wicked Sports channel for sports news, our Better Radio channel, which hosts all our podcasts, and our newest channel, History is Wicked, where we cover cryptids, urban legends, and weird history stories. Again, really appreciate you checking this one out, and I will see you in the next one.